Back again. Let's now talk about the national debt. The national debt is different than the deficit. The deficit is the shortfall for 1 year. The national debt is the ongoing summation of all the outstanding debt of the federal government, also known as the public debt. This is the total federal government debt that is outstanding. So all those T-bills, T-bonds, T-notes that are out there, you add them all up, that is our national debt. And it's the amount of the total money owed by the federal government. Who do they owe it to? Anyone who bought these things. I have some savings bonds, so they're not the big ones here, but savings bonds are part of the national debt, and therefore I do own a piece of the national debt. This is the national debt total going back to 1960s, became more of an issue in the 1980s, and again higher recently. And again, this is the recent situation with the COVID recession. This increase right here was due to the Great Recession. Again, government spending goes up in recessions. We have some of the automatic stabilizers that we talked about earlier. And the automatic stabilizers is where the government spends money without any current act. And so again, during the recession, unemployment benefits go up, food stamps go up, low income assistance goes up. Again, economists like to look at the national debt as a percent of GDP, because really it's really your ability to pay that debt, which we'll talk about later. We'll talk more about is the debt a problem. And debt normally is not a problem as long as people can make the payments. And so we like to look at GDP as a percentage of gross domestic product, because GDP is sort of a proxy for our ability to make the payments, because that's where we get most of our revenue from. The federal government does from income that's generated through GDP. Now, we had 100% of GDP going back to the Second World War, the national debt. By the 1970s, we got it down to 30. That's 40 right there. So we got it down to 30%. And then during the Reagan years, we got it going up again. Then during the Clinton years, initial increase, and then going back down again. In the Bush years, going up again. And then during the Obama administration, we had a stimulus package to get us out of the Great Recession. Tapered off there once the expansion had taken over or stopped the recession. And again, this is the response to the COVID recession. Another way to divide the debt is to look at the debt held by the public and intergovernmental holdings. Economists like to separate those two. So debt held by the public is debt held by individuals, corporations, state, local government, foreign governments, anything outside of U.S. government. Intergovernmental holdings represents money that's in trust funds of the federal government. The biggest one would be the Social Security Trust Fund. And so this is the debt that's held simply by non-government agencies. And this is the debt that's held by government trust funds, revolving funds, and special funds. The biggest by far is Social Security, which we're tapping into right now. The money was put in Social Security in the 1980s. At the time, we realized there was going to be a problem with population growth. Going back to the 1960s, there was about 5 workers paying Social Security taxes for every senior receiving them, the benefits. And then by 2000 and now, it's going to be a little more than 2 workers who are working for every senior citizen. So at the time in the 1980s, we realized there was a problem that's going to come. And so they increased taxes at that time more than they needed, and that excess money went into the trust fund. We're tapping into the trust fund now because less money is coming in than going out, and now we're using that to supplement the benefits. Trust fund for Social Security probably will run out about 2040. Depends on how fast we have to dip into it. We were surprised by the Great Recession when more people retired, and therefore we had to dip into Social Security a little more than we thought, the trust fund. And some of the national debt is held by foreign entities. And they sort of went into buying a lot of our debt in 2000s here. Now it's a little over, or between 8 trillion and 7 trillion. Down here, the exact number, 7.1 trillion. A lot of it is held by Japan, 1.3 trillion, and in China, 1.1 billion, or sorry, trillion. People think this is dangerous to have China owning our debt. Not really. There's nothing China can do with it. There's no leverage. In fact, we have the leverage. China is dependent upon us to pay that money back, and so they are very interested in the health of the U.S. economy. And this is good for the U.S. because it allows us to borrow the money and not have rates increase as much as they might. The money market is the money for people who want to save and borrow. We saw that in Chapter 5. And if there's a greater demand for this money through the U.S. running higher deficits, then that will increase interest rates. And so by having an increased supply come in from outside the United States, that keeps interest rates lower than they would normally be. And that lowers the cost of us borrowing the money. This website here, this has the current or the information for the foreign ownership of our debt. And if you go to that website, you'll see a table like this. And these are all the nations whose citizens, banks, corporations have purchased U.S. government debt. And you can see Japan's at the top there, and then China, and then UK has a fair amount, and so on. Now, is the U.S. government debt, the national debt, is this a liability or an asset? And the answer is yes. It depends who you are. If you are the federal government, the U.S. Treasury, then it's a liability to you because this is money that you owe to other people. So if you sell a Treasury bond, whoever bought that Treasury bond, you have a legal obligation to pay that money back plus the interest when the bond matures. And whoever has purchased these bonds, notes and T-bills, it's an asset to them. So as a taxpayer, I've part responsible for the debt, but as a purchaser of savings bonds, it's also partly as an asset to me as well. So dollar for dollar, the national debt creates as much wealth as liabilities. Now the question is the national debt a problem? Yes and no. First of all, the national debt bankrupt the nation. That's a possibility. But again, as long as you can make the payments are when the T-bonds, T-notes, T-bills mature, that the U.S. Treasury has the money on hand to pay those obligations, then everything is fine. It's like if you take on debt yourself, and as long as you make the monthly payments on your mortgage or your car loan, the bank is happy, everyone's happy, and that's fine. The problem is if you take on more debt than you can fund. And again, this might be sort of a problem now. Again, at the end of the Second World War, our national debt was over 100% of GDP at the time. We got it down to about the 30s, and now we are over 100%, and now maybe about 120, 130%. And who knows what's going to happen with the COVID recession. So that is something to be concerned about. All things being equal, I'm sure Americans will like to have less debt. But again, that's not the situation we're in right now. And also note there's no day of reckoning when all the debt comes due. There's no day when all has to be paid off. We started our country in debt when we fought the British in the American Revolutionary War. We actually had no debt for a couple months in 1833. Ever since then, the nation has been in debt. So we were in debt at the Civil War, First World War, Second World War, Korean War, Great Recession, COVID recession, and so that debt is never going to disappear. We might be able to get some of it. We might get the ratio down. Two ways to get the ratio down: debt, national debt as a percent of GDP. One way is to lower the amount of outstanding debt. That means we have to run surpluses, which we know we can. We did that in the late 1990s. Another way is to have debt increase at a lower rate than GDP. So if the national debt is going up by, say, 1% and GDP is going up by 3%, then that ratio would come down. And that's what we did between the Second World War and the 1970s, was that our national debt kept going up, but GDP was increasing at a much faster rate. Okay, I got some more points to make about the debt, and let me stop there and come back for the third part lecture for this part of Chapter 9.